Well, I tell you, I see the demand increasing in the semiconductor market moving forward. Um, Mainly due to the fact that we're seeing semiconductors used in so many places. In the past, you were thinking about semiconductors in the world of personal computers, and even when smartphones came along. But now, I mean, we're seeing them everywhere from your sensors for the Internet of Things to, of course, automobiles, high-end gaming, personal computers. So they're everywhere. So just in general, the overall demand for semiconductors is increasing just for our daily consumption, for our daily use. And so, to be honest, it's truly exciting from where we sit to be part of that.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess that the demand has accelerated faster than expected because of COVID, because everybody was remote, everybody wanted connectivity, everybody wanted bandwidth, everybody wanted their widget, and so COVID basically steepened the ramp. It people wanted it now. It was maybe 5 years down the road, so there's this big rush to do it now, and so COVID's driven this, and then with that, because there's more devices, there's more data, so there's more data to be crunched, and so it's a cycle that's not going to end, because it's all about information, edge computing, how you collect that data, how you do something meaningful with it, then monetize it. So yeah, I agree with Kelvin, but I think COVID has accelerated this whole new industrial revolution, if you will, for electronics.
Yeah, I kind of concur. I mean, I don't know, Angus, as you said, the pandemic has truly like kind of changed everything, right? And the semiconductor, in my opinion, is semiconductor industry has benefited greatly from folks needing to work from home. I was reading this article the other day that said, since 2020, each year, laptop, computer demand has risen by 50%. So, and as you said, Kelvin, I mean, lucky for us, semiconductors are becoming the fabric of people's everyday lives. So I agree. I think it's going to continue to move in a positive way.
Yeah, just to put some numbers to it, if I recall, in 2019, the industry at a top level was actually a down year for us, and we were, expecting 2020 to, be kind of flat or, maybe even down a little bit. But, to Angus's point, when the pandemic hit and the work from home, and you needed the computers, you needed, the kids needed the gaming systems, and all of that, it really escalated, and we saw an increase in the industry. And then last year in 2021, there was another increase in 25% year over year growth. So it's just continuing to see that growth. Or even this year, there's an anticipation of about 10% growth at the top level for the industry. And so I think all these factors combined is just leading to what we're seeing with an increase in demand for chips.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is that the automotive companies, that's the big headline. What happened with your car? I think they saw the pandemic and they backed off on orders because they thought sales were going to go down, and it went the other way. And so they canceled orders, and non-automotive companies used that capacity. So they couldn't go back and say, oh no, I want it back now. And so they got caught short. They have a not as a sophisticated supply chain for semiconductors as other companies do. And I think what happened was they backed off, somebody else bought the capacity, and when they come back, the capacity wasn't there. So, General Motors and these companies, they're in a crunch, Daimler's in a crunch, Volkswagen. And so, while that's only about 6% of the market, it's a growing market, it kind of caught the automotive industry flat-footed. So they're being proactive today, and they're working on solutions to make sure that doesn't happen again.
I don't know. What do you guys think about, there's the automotive industry there's lots of articles out there about them taking production, semiconductor chip production inside or internal. Angus in particular, I know you've got an experience in the fabs, and it's not as simple as just plugging it in and pushing a button, right? There's still a lot of workmanship there, and I have a feeling, there's a lot of they don't know what they don't know yet, and I don't know, how do you feel about that in general? What do you think?
Well, General Motors specifically announced, and I think maybe it's been misconstrued, they're now collaborating with foundries. They're designing with a TSMC a chipset for their automotive content. In the past, they had maybe 300 devices that they would buy from multiple places. Now they're trying to streamline that and get custom devices. They're not going to go back. GM used to have Delphi in Kokomo, Indiana, making sensors. They get out of the business. It's difficult for an automotive company to own a wafer fab because you need so much volume. So, and as an example, GM just signed a deal with Qualcomm, who is fabless, but they've got their new Snapdragon that's a 3 chipset for autonomous driving. So they're being proactive, like I said before. They're thinking a little bit further ahead. They're trying to manage the content in their vehicle. Right now, 40% of the cost to build a car is in electronics. By 2030, 45%. So these guys have to manage that because cost is, and cost and profitability. So they're going to get smart about it. They're going to build, instead of having a big circuit board with 100 chips on it, they'll build me a device that's multifunctional and does this, and I can program it. And so that's where that's going to go.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. I mean, they're trying to control what they can control. When there is a shortage and they're looking to their suppliers to get, chips that are needed for their cars, there's not much they can do. At the time, they weren't able to, even though the fabs and foundries were adding more capacity, they weren't able to cut in line and get what they wanted. So now I think that makes sense where they're trying to control what they can control and design specifically with the TSMC and ensure that they have the capacity needed so that they can do what they want to do. So it makes sense. And, Paul, to your point, I mean, is that, they may not have the skill set yet, but I'm sure they'll, try and get the right people and do what they need to do. But we'll just kind of see how it works as we move forward.
Yeah, there's a wealth of automotive suppliers. There's TI, there's onsemi, there's ST, there's Bosch. A lot of that's done in Europe. And so you're right. They're just going to have to be smarter about it. And they're being proactive. GM announced $7 billion for a new factory in the US. It's probably all going to be electric vehicles, a lot more content. So they're going to customize their offering from a semiconductor standpoint, make it more functional across platforms. So instead of buying, I need 100 of these, I need 2 of these. And it's managing their supply chain. So, it probably have a higher value, but there's a way to do this that I think makes sense for the auto manufacturers to be more involved with the foundries so that they get something that basically is customized for them.
And so, it's interesting you talk about, the shortage, the automotive shortage, and obviously the increased demand in the pandemic. And one thing we're seeing is so much new capacity coming on board, or at least being announced that's coming on board, across the world. A lot of it right now is in Asia. Most of the manufacturing and expansion is in Asia, but we're seeing so much here in the States as far as new announcements for fabs for Intel, TSMC, Samsung, TI, Micron, all the guys, Global Foundries, all the guys in the United States are talking about increasing their manufacturing. So it's really exciting. But I guess I'll ask, Angus, Paul, you have any thoughts on that as far as just what's going on here in the United States?
I'm super excited about that personally. I've been working in manufacturing, sales capacity for a long time. And typically what used to happen is you develop a prototype and get it, get your R&D technology incorporated, but it was always shipped overseas to manufacture. First it was Mexico, not necessarily for semiconductors. First it was Mexico, and then a transition to Southeast Asia. And I don't know, if you look back at when America really prospered is when we were manufacturing, we were very strong. And, with Intel announcing, a $25 billion investment in Arizona for a new facility, and another facility in Ohio, I think like $20 billion, and TSMC coming here. And that just means a lot of our next generation is going to be studying more. I think we're going to be producing more engineers and just manufacturing more. And I just feel like it's a really good time for the economy in general.
Yeah, I think to some degree it's driven also by some geopolitical pressure, from the Far East. Also, if you look at the US, so Samsung's already here. They're going to build a new factory. TSM's coming to town. Intel stumbled a few years ago. They had a wafer fab, Fab 42. They said, oh, let's hold off. And then they ran out of capacity. So they've opened up Fab 42. But if you look at the US as a nation, and for critical infrastructure, for telecom, for communications, for defense, we don't have a strong technical partner. And I think Intel is going to fill that void. They're going to build capacity. The two factories they're building in Arizona are going to be foundries. They're going to take, they're a secure partner for the US government and for the big, military industrial complex. So I think there's a desperate need for that in this country because of the geopolitical situation. But they're getting into the foundry game, and they're going to be able to offer an integrated solution, a microprocessor, a memory, and some logic with their new packaging technologies. I think they're going to be a viable player against TSMC and Samsung. They're not going to be the same size because these guys are way ahead of the curve. But I think Intel has some tricks up its sleeve from a technology standpoint. They just announced that they're buying some steppers from ASML, and they're looking at 2 nanometer, which is, quite a leap for them. But I think it's kind of like a sleeping giant, if you will. I think we might be surprised, and I hope that they're successful because it's exciting. Just like Paul said, it's good to see some of it on our home turf.
Yeah, and then the advanced node manufacturing, that's always been in Asia. To bring, I think TSMC is bringing 5 nanometer when they come. When they'll, which will probably be a couple of years when they can actually manufacture. And like you said, Intel's even looking at 2 nanometer already. So just having the advanced nanometer, advanced technology here as well, where in the past it's been more 200 millimeter and some lower levels. So that's really exciting. I think, like Paul mentioned earlier about just the talent and what we're going to see here based upon that's really exciting as well. So I think it's really exciting time not only for the industry but specifically even here in the United States with what's going on with the expansions.
So I think one of the biggest things is now people are saying let's go, let's build. Historically, TSMC, if you use them as sort of like the gold standard because they've built a lot of capacity, they can go from mud, meaning they've got the permits, they've got the land, they're signed off, to silicon in about 30 months. So they can start breaking ground, get to silicon in 30 months. But today, there's not enough steel to do frames. The supply chain from semiconductor capital equipment is running as fast as possible. So while Intel and TSMC are building in Arizona, and they're pushing as hard as they can, that 30-month from mud to silicon, as I would call it, is going to be tough because the supply chain in general, not just for semiconductor, for construction, for insulation, for concrete, is pretty tight right now. So that's going to be another interesting dynamic to see how that plays out.
And that's interesting as far as how long it takes for a fab kind of to come up to speed, especially with all the announcements that we're hearing. So we know there's a shortage. Automotive has talked about when can we get over this. I've looked at a ton of articles that talk about, is it going to be the second half of 22? Is it going to be the beginning of 23? And it's really hard to know when we're kind of get out of this what we consider a shortage situation. But I do think with the amount of fabs that are coming on board here in the United States being announced and also in Asia, that we are bringing on a lot of capacity into the market. So I think that's a good thing where we should be able to maybe kind of get over the hurdle in the next year or so. At least that's kind of what I'm hearing. But as far as moving forward, it's also there to support the number of devices that we talked about, with semiconductor being everywhere. So I think the capacity that we're seeing being added into the market is just vital for us to kind of get over that next hump to be able to support what we're seeing with the growth.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think they're building and going to have an overcapacity, like a flattening of the ramp or the demand, because we've got the automotive problem, and that's for internal combustion engines. But just as I said, GM's building a new EV factory. The content goes up exponentially. So it's just not control systems, it's power control. So industry, our environment, global warming is causing changes that aren't going to go away. And so we're having to adjust, so automotive is going to adjust, the demand is going to continue to go up. High performance computing, cloud computing, data centers, the metaverse from, it's not a Facebook only thing, but AI and AR consume massive amounts of data, bandwidth, and computing power. So that's not going to go away, because this working remotely also comes with advancements in how people can improve manufacturing. So it's all going to tie together, and I don't think it's going to slow down. It's like when Henry Ford started the car. Look where we are today. I think we're right back there. We're at a massive ramp, and it's just going to. I wouldn't say it's exponential, but I don't see this slowing down in the next 10 years at all.
No, I concur with both, what you guys said. And, in general, companies, will tend to be pretty conservative in terms of investing, right, to expand capacity, for instance. But I mean, the last 2 years for the semiconductor industry has been, just crazy in terms of growth. And with recorded sales instead of forecasts, I think that really does give companies the confidence to actually make those investments quickly before they're left out, right? So there's a race to support this growth, overall industry growth, and I think that's really going to facilitate and hopefully shorten, when these fabs come online. And like you said, Angus and Kelvin, it seems like there's always something coming in behind. Last 2 years, laptop was driving it. 5G is just starting to come on, so there's always something behind it to facilitate the growth. So, I think the market's in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, the industry, if I look at one of the, I think it was a WSTS article, World Semiconductor Trade Statistics, mentioned that the expectation is to get to a $600 billion market this year in 2022. I want to say the market was in the 400 billion level, maybe about 6-8 years ago. So serious growth, and then looking at getting to $1 trillion by 2030. I mean, that's just the expectation when you look at just a fairly conservative CAGR. You can get to $1 trillion by 2030. So again, just speaks of the not only the importance but the demand that's out there for the chips. And I just know, we've all been in this industry for, decades, and, we've seen in the past the cyclical nature of it. And as you see these types of growths we've seen recently, you're really expecting, kind of a downturn on the other end. Although some of the forecasts are showing a little bit of a dip, maybe it's a slowing growth, nothing like we've seen before. And I kind of think the cyclicality of it, we're not going to see like we used to. And there was one article I saw, and they mentioned that a lot of the cyclicality we've seen over the last 10 years is really due to memory and the changing in ASPs just due to supply and demand. So it's really not a unit issue as much as it's a change in the dollar value of memory that has caused some cyclicality on the revenue end. So I do think that just the industry itself is so much more healthier than it used to be, based upon a lot of the drivers that we talked about.
No, I agreed. And, from a semiconductor capital equipment side, if you look at the 4 or 5 companies that buy 90% of the CapEx now, it used to be 100. It was like the automotive industry. There was 100 car companies. Now there's 4 or 5. And that's what's happened to semiconductors. So when TSMC orders, they know what they're ordering. It's not like they're ordering and competing against somebody else. So the market's condensed. 4 or 5 big guys is much smaller. And so their forecasting is much more accurate. They're not competing against another guy on winning business. So, I didn't win that, let's cancel an order. So it's become much more stable. And the capital equipment manufacturers are much more sophisticated because they're they're at the tail when that changes. When it changes and they cancel orders, it's deadly for companies like Applied and Lam. So they're very careful how they do it now and how they place their orders. So that cyclicality has damped down significantly from an OEM and an IDM standpoint to where, you know, it's pretty stable. I think it's much more predictable. And yeah, I'm with Kelvin. I'm feeling good about it.
Yep, definitely agree. I think the peaks and valleys are going to be a lot more friendly.